Hi guys, in this video I cover bounded type parameters in the context of generics. I first cover lower bounds and then I'll focus on upper bounds. I will use an interface that represents a vehicle. This interface has two methods, one method to set a color and the other method to get and return a color. This interface is implemented by a class named car, and this class has a single member variable of type color, and it implements the getter and setter methods for that member variable. I will be using both this interface and this car in my example. Next, in the example, I want to implement a method that adds n number of cars to an array list. This method has a void return type. I name it add cars. The first argument is an array list of cars, and the second argument defines the count, and the count represents the number of cars I want to add to that array list. I'll use a for loop for int I equals 0, I less than count, I plus plus, and inside I'll add a new car to that array list. So in each iteration, I create a new car and add it to the list. So in my main, I create a new instance of car with a generic argument of type car. I call this cars, new array list. And then I call the add cars method to add 3 cars to that list. So this one works fine and there's no problem. But what happens when I have an array list with vehicles? So let's say here I have an array list with vehicles, and this array list can now store cars, but it could store trucks and boats and all kind of vehicles that we can think of in that array list. So when I want to add a certain number of cars and I call my method, I get a compile error. And the reason for this is that my method expects a generic argument of type car, but here I have the generic argument of type vehicle. So these two types don't match. But there's no reason for this array list to be of type car, because when I add a car to a list, I don't care so much what is stored in the list, right? It could be pencils, it could be strings, integers. All I care about is that I have a list and I want to add a car to it. And with generics, this is a good example of a lower bound. So here I use a lower bound, and this uses the super keyword. So I use a wildcard, super, and then the lower bounded class. What this will do is that I can have any class, but at the minimum, I have to have the car class. So it can be car or any implementing interface or superclass of car. And with this, the compile error that I saw earlier went away. In fact, I could create an array list of objects. And when I have objects here, I can also add cars to it. I pass the objects array list to that method. Let's say I want to add 5 cars. This works as well. So this is how lower bounds work. I need at least the lower bound, because when I add a car to something, the array list has to be able to store a car. I wouldn't be able to pass an array list with a subclass of car and then trying to add a car to it. Now, next, let's focus on upper bounds. Again, I have a method, and I call this method paint. It also expects an array list of type car, and the second argument will be a color. What I will do here is I'll iterate over the cars in the list, and for each car, I want to paint it to the provided color. I'll import the color, and now I can use that method to paint all the cars in my list. So let's try it with the first array list of type car. I call it paint, I pass cars to it, and say I want to color these white. This one works fine, obviously, because I have the type here and here, which are the same. Let's try to paint vehicles. So here, let's paint these red. And this won't work because the type here is vehicle and here the type is car. Now, what would happen if we were to use a lower bound again? Now, if I were to use a lower bound with a super keyword, it will first of all not work here, but I could change this to a vehicle. This will not work too. I could change this all the way up to an object. But when I'm at an object, it won't work because object doesn't have the setColor method. So what I want here is I want to have an array list with a class that has the setColor method or any class on a subclass thereof. In this case, the setColor method is provided by the interface vehicle. So I say I want to have a class that's a vehicle, and then here I use the extends keyword. So it's an upper bound. So upper bound is provided with the extends keyword. And what I say here is I have a class vehicle, or it can be any subclass of vehicle. And subclass, right, any class that implements, in this case, the interface. Here it doesn't matter if this is an interface or a class. Same like with a super keyword, it can be a class or an interface. It's really just any type that we have defined. Now I still have the compile error here, and I want to change this to the upper bound class that I provided here. So now I can say for any vehicle that is provided, I'll set the color to the provided color. So we can see that the error went away. I can paint now an array list of cars. I can also paint an array list of vehicles. And I cannot paint an array list of objects. So if I were to try this, this will give me a compile error, rightfully so, because objects don't have the setColor method. So I do not want to have this. But if there's any other subclass that implements either vehicle or car, I could create an array list, and I could say I want to paint all these vehicles in that array list to the provided color. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching.